Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate vision into frontline strategies. Today is going to be fun. Talking about, I'm not going to give it out. I'm going to let Michael talk about it. Michael, what is name, title, rank, serial number? What do you do for a living?
I'm Michael Bach. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the CEO of CCDI Consulting based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Fabulous. Thank you. Before we start, Michael's books are going to be in our tab at whatceostalkabout.com. So you'll be able to click on those links, get it at the bottom of the episode. You'll get his services, all of that stuff. And you can find all of that on whatceostalkabout.com. We've got some insights, topics, services, books, you name it, money.com, all the resources that you want. Go out there, fill your boots, have fun. All right. Michael, what is the title of the show? We struggle with this one. We're like, okay, two creative guys. Come on. We should be able to come up with something.
The title of the show is The Cost of the Closet.
Da, 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 da. I love it. Yeah. For those people who are listening and not watching, go to the website and click. I mean, Michael's got beautiful picture frames of, I believe, all of your books, right?
Yep.
Behind. Alphabet Soup. I love that one. That's a good one. Tell us, Michael, it's important for the listeners in the audience to know what are you talking about, and to be able to do so, they have to understand the character behind the comments and discussion. So could you be so kind as to tell us, where were you born? How'd you grow up? All that path, and kind of give us in your path, where were kind of critical times where you had to make a decision when you evolved from I'll say from one individual to another, because the journey is not always the same kind of caterpillar butterfly. So if you'd be so kind as to tell us your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I born and raised in Toronto, grew up in the city, right?
Nobody's blaming you.
I know.
So it's a Canadian joke for those people out there. There's an animosity between big cities. We always hate Toronto.
People from Toronto hate Toronto, so it's totally fine. Raised in a downtown in a very typical white upper middle class family, but raised by a couple hippies. Dad may or may not have been a drug dealer in the 60s. It's just a rumor.
That was a pastime in the 60s.
Just, right? Like if you weren't a drug dealer, it was kind of odd. Like people looked at you funny. Went to university at the University of Victoria in beautiful British Columbia. Oh. Yep. And I was doing a bachelor in fine arts because that seemed like a useful degree. And I was, the intention was I was going to be an actor. Cut to me being an IT professional. And I spent most of my career working in technology in some way, shape, or form. And then in 2005, while I was at KPMG, I had the opportunity to write a business case for the creation of a role in what we now call diversity. And it was one of those moments where kind of my passion and my profession merged, because I'd always done this work, whether it was around the inclusion of 2SLGBTQI plus people, around people with disabilities, women, newcomers, but it wasn't a job. No one was going to pay me what I wanted to make in order to do that. I'd do it as a volunteer, which is great, but all of a sudden it was a job. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, I want that. If someone's willing to pay me, I'll do it. So I was in that role for 7 years. I was also the deputy chief diversity officer for the firm globally for 2.5 years. And then in 2012, I started what's called the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And
before you go there, Michael, can you explain what KPMG is? Because a lot of people might not know how friggin' huge
absolutely.
KPMG is.
Yes. It's not a radio station, as I have been constantly asked, once by Marley Matlin, but that's a story. KPMG is an audit, tax, and advisory services firm. They're referred to as one of the big four, the others being Deloitte, EY, and PwC. They operate in 100 and I don't even know what the exact number is now. When I was there, it was 152 countries around the world.
A third of the planet.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of employees. So I worked with the Canadian firm specifically for 7 years and 2.5 with 152 different firms, which was an interesting experience.
As Chief Diversity Officer.
Yes. Yeah.
Correct?
That's correct.
That is, so I just want the listeners to have that sink in for a second. You're the Chief Diversity Officer for an organization that employs 100,000, well,
it's more than 100,000, probably closer to 2.
Around, 200,000 people in over 100 countries. So that you want to talk about alphabet soup.
Oh,
I mean,
well,
that is crazy.
In every country, there's a different definition of what we're talking about when we say diversity and inclusion.
Exactly. Right?
There is no such thing as global diversity. Even around gender, if we just talk about the binary gender of men and women, there are such vastly different treatments of women around the world.
Oh,
it's not even close. So it was really challenging to have a consistent conversation. So I had 152 different conversations, and we looked at each country specifically and what they, where their priorities were and what mattered to them, and had to adjust constantly. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. So
right.
2 years in on being the global big boss, and all of a sudden something clicked.
Well, so I came back into the Canadian firm, and I recognized that there was a gap in the market, that we as a country are ridiculously large, second largest landmass country in the world, but with a teeny tiny little population, 80% of which live 100 miles from the US border. And so I felt we needed an organization that was there to help employers with diversity and inclusion across the country, and pan diversity and inclusion. So not just one particular demographic group, but all demographic groups. So I started that organization, and I became the CEO in 2013. I was the CEO until April of last year, and now I'm the CEO of CCDI Consulting, which is the for-profit consulting arm of the charity. So we make money and we put it back into the charity. So to answer your
there's a lot of
this is a tax thing that
for those who don't know this. So when you work in charity, there is for-profit and for non-for-profit, and there is for non-for-profit charity, and so therefore there's tax liabilities on both sides. So there's a complexity. You know what? I talked about this with Matt Smedley on Mission Possible. For those who are listening who want to know more about the interaction behind nonprofit and for-profit, go listen to Matt Smedley. I can't remember what the title is, but anyways, it's complex.
Yeah. So to come back to your question about sort of the metamorphosis, there have been many in my life. Probably the most important ones have been in the past 20 years, where I went from doing a job to having a career.
Good one.
Because when I worked in IT, I didn't really care. I did my job. I went to work. I, went home at the end of the day and didn't really think about.
Punched the ticket.
And getting into a career in diversity, that became my life. And it is a life that I wouldn't trade for any amount of money. It just it's one that really makes sense to me. And it ticks all the boxes because I'm not an HR person.
Mm-hmm. You're an IT
I'm
guy.
An IT guy. I'm a business
raised
person.
And trained as an IT guy.
Right? I'm a dirty capitalist. I like money. I have no problem with making money. And yet I'm also somebody who is very analytical and can look at problems and step back and say, we're wasting money. And those moments, and then of course shifting to being the CEO of CCDI, the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and CCDI Consulting, where I took it to another level in terms of not just being in a career, but being a leader in my field. So there have been multiple shifts, but those two certainly are the bigger ones.
That kind of leads us in the title of the show, right? So could you repeat for us the title of the show?
The Cost of the Closet. And there's a subtitle. Should I say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
How employers are wasting money by not creating 2SLGBTQI plus inclusive workspaces. I feel like I was saying that so someone could write it down.
Drum roll, lights on, just put the flashing cards.
It's probably
out.
just Lady Gaga music
now,
at this point,
So we've opened the door to the closet of the conversation. Yeah. So tell us, why are you putting that statement out there? Why do you think CEOs are wasting money?
So I have worked in what we now call the 2SLGBTQI plus inclusion space for over 30 years. I know that's difficult for your viewers to imagine, because if you're looking at me, you think, oh my gosh, he's not 30. If you don't have your eyes closed, or you do. Yeah, so over 30 years. And it took me a long time. I was very social justice on it. It was the right thing to do. And that wasn't getting us anywhere. And it wasn't until I started to look at it from a business perspective and to say, where, potentially is the argument from the perspective of how is this hurting the top and bottom line? And I came through a number of pieces of research and means to the argument of it's costing you money to have a closet. And just to put this in perspective, and the data is all over the place. So let's just, I have to add that caveat at the beginning, because there isn't like empirical, this is absolute data.
Of course.
Somewhere between 46 and 69% of 2S LGBTQI plus people are not out at work. And that's varying degrees of not out to anyone, or maybe out to one person or a few people. And you basically have two scenarios. If you're not out at work, you have somebody who is effectively hiding, not able to bring their whole self to work.
Correct.
And the other scenario is if they are out at work, they tend to be the educator, because people are asking them questions about, oh, can you explain trans to me? Or what's this? Why is there an I in the initialism now? And if you think about those two things, they're not part of someone's job. But if you were to say 15 minutes out of a person's workday is spent either hiding themselves or educating others, and add it all up, they're wasting about 65 hours of their work year based on a 40-hour work week, et cetera. 65 hours of their work is wasted time. That's money that employers are paying to somebody, but it's not actually getting them what they're supposed to be getting. And then you take the...
Let me interject for something for the listeners. When Michael says out,
yes,
thank you. That means for the listeners, it actually means that they are openly addressing how they are different.
Yeah, so their identity,
so
their sexuality, gender is known to others.
Correct. So just so that people know, and it's not out like out of the door or out of work, is they're out there, they're identifying as somebody who is not stereotypical heterosexual male female kind of place.
Yeah.
So that
It's a good.
I just wanted to put
It's
that
a
out
good
there.
point, Martin. And
I would also add that not just time-wise, but the thought process as well. Like, what are
Yeah.
people thinking about me? What did
Oh,
Jim
yeah.
say? What did Jim think? Right? So they're not 100% committed. Not that they're not committed; they are committed. But their thought process is I always say there's three states of safety. We focus a lot in corporations in physical safety, right? So everybody knows the safety program, emergency response. You need to go down the stairs, blah, 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 fire. Okay. Now we've got people are starting to think about, okay, so let's create mental awareness or mental safety. Okay. So how do you treat people? Do they have a balance? What we're talking about here is emotional safety as well.
Yeah.
So people are feeling either not safe or at risk in a position. Well, Michael and Martin left the meeting. Michael's thinking, well, what does Martin think about me? How does he feel? Does he feel that I'm not doing the right job? Does he? So there's this, think of people, and sorry, I'm going to stand for you, Michael, for a little bit. A lot of people who have had these identity issues have struggled their lives trying to fit in. And so that's self-doubt, that's self-awareness. I don't give a shit where you come from. You have to recognize that. So big trauma. I was in the military. I've seen dead people. I buried children in Bosnia. And you think I have a big fucking T? I do. Okay. So, but recognizing that somebody's T, no matter how little you think it is to you, might be a big T to them. So, sorry, I just wanted to.
It's good clarification. It's good. Yeah. And when we talk about the cost of the closet, we're talking about people who are not fully out, and
correct.
Whether that's dealing with there's a lot of factors here. We can talk about psychological safety. We can talk about any number of things. But again, 15 minutes a day, 65 hours a year, average salary is around 50 grand a year. There's a lot of people who make a lot more than that, but I founded my argument in generalized data. So 50 grand a year. Long story short, in Canada, based on about a population of 5%, it's somewhere in the range of about $250 billion that we are wasting in salaries. In the United States, it's I forget what the number is exactly. Anyway, between the two countries, it's over $1 trillion that is just being wasted.
Oh, shit.
Because we're not making good decisions as business leaders. We are not creating inclusive spaces. We're not acknowledging sexuality and gender. And I don't care what your opinion is about people who are 2SLGBTQI plus. Don't give a damn. If you are a business leader and you care about your business, then this will be a priority because it's costing you money. It's costing you money in the hours that people are spending not doing their job, on low levels of engagement, on low levels of productivity and innovation, on higher levels of voluntary turnover, on safety incidents. Then the list is long of areas where it's costing you. And my calculation around the $1 trillion is just on the salary waste. It has nothing to do with anything else.
Just on time, yeah.
There is so many other factors that you could measure and calculate and say, this is what it's costing us to not have an inclusive workplace. And I just think that's a really stupid business decision. Regardless, I don't care if you're homophobic or not. It doesn't matter to me. Are you a smart business person?
Yeah. And what are some key, so people have got your attention, they're listening, they say, okay, shit, yeah, that makes sense, Michael. What are some of the top two or three things that people can do, CEOs can do to say, okay, great, I think I'm inclusive, but from what Michael might, I might not be as inclusive as Michael and Martin are talking about. So what are kind of three things that, easy, I shouldn't say easy peasy, but top of the list, kind of big ROI activities that a CEO can start doing that is going to add value to their team and their bottom line?
So first is read my book. No, I'm kidding.
Well, of course.
My publishers made me say this. Yeah.
Of course
So a few things that immediately come to mind. Things around policies, procedures, make sure they're inclusive. As an example, do you use the term maternity leave or do you use the term parental leave? Maternity leave
good one.
is a very specific legal consideration. It is very narrow. There's lots of different types of parents. I'm not saying you don't have a maternity leave policy. You need to have that legally, but a maternity leave policy and a parental leave policy, not necessarily the same things. So looking at the language you're using, is it inclusive? Are you using gender neutral pronouns? That sort of thing. Policies and procedures are kind of like the foundation of a house. If you don't have a good foundation, a house falls down. So you need to make sure that those things are inclusive. Next is just to educate. This is not necessarily natural for people. Like I've rattled off the initialism 2SLGBTQI plus a few times. And I'm certain that there are people who are listening or watching to this that don't have a clue what that stands for. And that's okay. Read my book. No, find out what those letters mean. Because you'll hear LGBT, you'll hear LGBTQ, LGBTQ2, LGBTQIA. There's so many different versions of the initialism. And
I was the first one.
Right?
IA. I was like, holy shit, what does the IA stand for?
Intersex and asexual. Just, there's lots of different letters in the initialism. It's why you see the plus sign at the end, is because we sort of ran out of space on the page and said, let's just add the plus and that'll be all the other identities. But education is so critical, because if people don't understand what inclusion looks like, they don't understand how to change their behavior, because they think I'm being a good person. And this isn't about whether or not you're a good person. It's whether or not you're being inclusive in your behavior. And those two things are not necessarily the same thing. So I would say the second thing is education. And it's critically important to educate everybody so that they understand their role in creating an inclusive workplace. Because the reality is that employers cannot force an inclusive work environment. CEOs can't say, this is going to be an inclusive workplace. If everyone doesn't understand what an inclusive workplace looks like and their role in it, if they don't buy into it, then it's not going to be an inclusive workplace. It is very individualistic. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The one thing that I learned a couple of recordings, I think it was last year, 6 months ago, the difference between equality, diversity, and inclusivity, right? And so diversity is very touchy because it can be very explosive, right? So if you're targeting, so when I joined the military, I had the choice between going to the RCMP and or the military. And because I was a white male Caucasian, they said, well, no, your bar for the exam is much higher than if you were a black man. If you're a black man, the bar is a lot lower. And so it creates more animosity than anything else in regards to creating inclusivity. And so I learned that a while back. For me, the big thing about inclusivity, diversity, and equality is and this is something that I struggle with because I don't know how to deal with it. When did somebody's sexual orientation impact their work and the need for us to put that out there? And that just blows my mind how I just don't understand it. And maybe you can help us out.
Well, it doesn't. The reality is that my sexual orientation or gender identity does not impact my ability to do my job. However, having an exclusionary environment does impact my ability to do my job.
Oh, so true. Yeah.
And, it's important to keep a few things in mind. For example, there are 71 countries on the planet where it's illegal to be gay. 43 countries.
What?
Yep. 43 countries where it's illegal to be a lesbian. 15 countries where it's illegal to be trans. Sort of variety of laws. And before anyone thinks, it's countries you've never heard of. Jamaica, St. Lucia. There's lots of countries.
What?
Keep in mind that my marriage, I've been married for 14 years, almost 13. My marriage has only been legal for 17 years. Equal marriage equality in Canada has only been legal for 17 years. In the United States, it's like 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's not that I have to talk about my sexuality at work, my gender identity at work, but in not considering it, if not creating it, you're creating a potentially hostile workplace, because I don't know if I'm safe. And you brought this up at the beginning. As a queer person, I've experienced a lack of safety in my life, and lots of 2SLGBTQI plus people have experienced a lack of safety in their lives.
Oh yeah,
be that physical violence.
I don't guess.
Mental. Like, we've all been there.
Abuse.
And so we look for signs that a space is safe, and if we don't see those signs, we're going to hide, because many of us are part of the invisible minority, because we can be standing in front of you and you don't necessarily know. I have my nails painted. For people watching, you can see that. And it doesn't matter why I do that. That might give you an indication. Oh, maybe he's that way. But otherwise, if I'm walking down the street, you're not going to know. We talk about sexuality and gender at work all the time. We have since time immemorial. We just happen to only talk about heterosexual and cisgender. Because if I go into someone's office and there's a photo of their opposite sex spouse on their desk, or maybe it's a wedding photo, I can generally go, oh, you're straight. It's still an assumption. I want to be very clear that just because you are married to a person of the opposite sex doesn't mean you're straight and doesn't mean you're cisgender. But I can make an assumption. And that's what it's about. This is about creating safe space where I can just come to work and be myself. It should not matter at all. But I'll tell you a story. So in the 90s, I worked for a bank. It was a Canadian bank that shall remain nameless to protect the guilty in the United States. And I led technology in the US operations. Not the point. There's no protections in law for sexual orientation, or at least there was at the time. So I could have been fired for being gay. I hid. I was completely in the closet. And I talked about my girlfriend at work, even though it was my boyfriend. And I was living this double life where at home and in the community, I was very active in the queer community, but at work, I had to put on this suit and tie, this suit of armor, and hide who I was. I was not as engaged in my job. I was not as productive. I didn't care about my employer because they hadn't taken the time to make. They didn't care about me. So,
and the energy that you were expanding, hiding yourself,
exhausting,
right? When you think about it, it's energy that you're wasting, holding everything back, right? You're going like, okay, I got to hold this in. Am I doing the right thing? Oh, hold on a second. I have to watch what I'm saying. I can't talk about Mike. And so, oh shit. Yeah. It's draining too.
Well, and consider that every person I come into contact with, I have to consider whether or not mentioning my husband, who is named Mike as well. Yes, I'm in a same name.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't even.
It's important to mention that I'm in a same name relationship. It's an old joke. I
laughed at it. I thought it was
somebody
funny.
laughs at it. I have to consider whether or not that person is going to respond positively or negatively to hearing that I'm married to a man. Every single person I have to consider, am I coming out to them? And that you don't come out once, you come out multiple times a day, every day for your entire life. And I mean, frankly, I'm just old. So I got to the point where I don't give a crap anymore. I'm like, if you've got a problem with it, you have a problem. But that's not the case for a lot of people. And, we talk about sexuality at work. We talk about gender at work and have for centuries. We just haven't necessarily talked about identities that weren't straight and cisgender.
It's so true. It is absolute. Thank you so very much for that education. It's so true. Hey, how's Jenny doing? How are your kids doing? Although you're addressing his relationship. I'll say his because I'm talking to, I don't know, Jeff, and Jeff and Jenny have a kid, and his name is Josh. But so you're implicitly addressing his sexuality by talking about Jenny and his family.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it doesn't fit the male, female kid situation, say, hey, Michael, how's Mike doing? Somebody's going to actually think about it. Oh, you're married to a guy. And then all of a sudden the conversation comes out. Fucking hell. Thank you.
I don't blame anyone
when you don't live it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I know. It's having the opportunity to talk about it and ask questions about it and being open about it, just the way that we are now. There's nothing wrong. Like I can't, like it's the same thing. I'm a male. I don't know what it is to give birth.
Right.
I can empathize. I can support. I can do as my CEO. You know, we've had a few kids come at Urgio within our company. I have no idea what it is to push a kid out of my body.
No.
So for me to say, hey, listen, how are you as a female, as a woman? It's the same thing. If you're gay and you've been that way, have the conversation. Don't be afraid to say, hey, Michael, how can I help? What can I do to make you feel safe? People tend to say, well, I don't want to talk to Michael about that because, you know, I don't want to offend him. You're an idiot. You're being curious and kind in an approach to say, hey, Michael, how can I help you? What can we do as an organization to make you feel safe? And would that be too much to ask?
No, not at all. And I think the other thing is own that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I guarantee you're going to make a mistake. What matters is how you respond to that mistake. So misgendering someone, referring to them as she when it should be he or they, it will happen. The question is not, to try to make it perfect. The question is to say, how am I going to respond to it when I do screw up? And the response is, okay, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to correct myself and move on. It's, there's so much there to unpack, but it's the simple things. Like instead of saying a husband or wife, say partner or spouse. So you see a wedding ring on someone's hand. Instead of saying immediately, oh, what's your opposite sex spouse's name? Say, what's your partner's name? What's your spouse's name? Yeah. Instead of husband or wife. Yeah. That is the simplest thing.
Yeah.
And what it does is it gives me permission to make the choice of coming out or not. But if you immediately, if you saw my wedding ring and said, oh, what's your wife's name? Okay, his name is Mike. So not very wifey. That shuts me down because then I have to be like, oh, crap, here we go again. W然if you say, what does your spouse do? What does your partner do? I can say, oh, he's an accountant. And it sends a message to me that this is an inclusive space. And it really, more than anything, the thing that I would advise CEOs is we have to break the mold of your assumed straight and cisgender until proven otherwise. And that means...
Say that again. Yeah. So I want this to really sink in.
You are assumed...
Say it really slow. Say it.
You are assumed straight and cisgender until proven otherwise. That is society writ large. Because
that's so true.
When our kids are born, we look down. I didn't, but you look down at their genitals. You assign a gender to them by saying it's a boy or it's a girl. But that's not true. What you say is it's a male or it's a female. Those are sex assignments. Boy and girl are genders. Gender cannot be determined by your genitals. When we talk about marriage, it's always husband and wife. Google, under Google Images, just search for the word marriage. You will get
and you'll see a boy and a girl on top
straight,
of
all opposite sex spouses.
Guy, girl on top of a wedding cake.
Yeah.
You'll get a guy in a tuxedo and a girl in a wedding dress on top of a wedding cake.
And it's not to discount straight marriage. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
It's just a matter of letting go of all of that and having different versions. And we see a lot more. We see in commercials, you'll see what is inferred to be a same-sex couple. You'll see trans people. You'll see a diversity of identities in the media, which is sending a better message. But for CEOs, it's just sort of let go of this straight cis binary because there's a lot more out there.
There's two things for me. There's the thing that what I push a lot of people towards is that life decisions and biology are two different things, right? Who you love and the life choices that you make are not related to biology. You know, biology to procreate, you have to have a sperm and an egg. That's just you can't make a baby with two sperms. You can't make a baby with two eggs. It's just not going to happen.
No,
it's just biology is biology. Don't associate life choices with biology. And I think that's for me, that's the rule of thumb that who you choose to love and associate with and how you want to spend your time has nothing to do with procreation.
Correct.
And so that's kind of the one thing that I want to come back to. This happened at the rugby club that we're at. So I've been coaching my daughter for a long time. Okay. So this last year we had a transgender who was born a girl, wanted to be a boy. Now, correct my language if I ever, because I need assistance on that. Okay, so she was born a girl,
assigned.
She wanted to be assigned.
I'm going to correct you and say she was assigned female at birth. Again, doctor looks down, sees vagina, says it's a girl, but in actual fact should say it's female. That's a sex term.
Okay, female. Thank you.
So she grew up as a girl. Yep.
Correct. And then she wanted to be a boy.
She identifies as a boy.
Thank you very much for the coaching, Michael. I appreciate it. She identified as a boy. Because the boys on the boys team are a lot more bigger, muscular, and the best place and the safest place physically for him to practice rugby was with the girls team. And so the management gave us, and they said, hey, listen, this is the situation we're faced with. You can't say, come on, ladies, come on, girls, let's go. Right. Yep. And so that we were told that, but you're talking to fathers that, and senior women, the coach. And so we've got a history of saying, come on team, let's go ladies, let's go. Come on. And then I changed my language to, hey guys. And I always use guys because I think, and so I got reprimanded for saying, come on guys, speaking to the group, and the entire group told me, said, hey Martin, you need to pick something where we all agree on that, we all interact with. So as much as the management came down on me, I was really stuck in the middle. I was like, okay, athletes is hard to say. It's like, for me, it was difficult to make that change as a coach. You identify something, you say, hey, come on guys, right? Let's hustle it up. Okay. And so I asked and I took the time and I said, okay, I'm really stuck. I'm really stuck, folks. I need your help. And the entire team of U14 girls to U18 girls said, Martin, and even, I'm not going to say the person's name, he said, Martin, it's okay. It's okay. I appreciate the effort and I know that you're inclusive, and just stick with it. And so the story that I'm trying to push is, no matter if it's right or wrong, when you have a conversation and you're kind and you're compassionate and you're looking to make things change, to your point, Michael, you are going to make mistakes. Just own them and say, okay, how do I make you feel safe?
You have to accept that gender is gender binary. And what I mean when I say the gender binary is men and women. And the idea that that's all that exists. The gender binary and gender stereotypes or gender norms are beaten into us at infancy. You go and buy a gift for someone who's just had a child. You have two options, pink or blue.
pink or blue, right?
That's it. And it is, I mean, I could go on for a very long time about how how gender is stuffed into things, whether we like it or not. You look at toys, and toys for girls are very different than toys for boys. We make all sorts of assumptions. And
correct.
The reality is things like, hey, ladies, it's so ingrained in our brains that it's really hard to break that cycle. True, right? I'm also somebody who would say, hey, guys, what's going on? When I was talking to anybody, I use it as a genderless term.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a whole lot of political correctness going on that is not necessarily occurring amongst gender diverse people, but it's occurring amongst cisgender people who think they are doing the right thing. To your point, this trans boy came and he was like, it's okay. You can use guys. It's fine. But everyone else was thinking, oh gosh, we have to use gender neutral language. But it's hard to use gender neutral language. You have to shift your brain.
Shit.
I'm old. My brain is it's pretty solid. It doesn't have a lot of elasticity in it. And so it's really hard to get out of those paradigms of saying things like gender pronouns, like he and she, when someone refers to themselves as they. And it takes a lot of effort. But the good thing is, if you work on it, the more you work on it, the easier it gets. So I say things like, hey, folks, which I realize makes me sound like a peanut farmer, but it's gender neutral and I can go with it. And I probably should be a peanut farmer. Or I say, hey, people. And I've worked at it. So now I don't fall into those traps of saying, hey, guys, or hey, ladies. I say, hey, ladies, but I say to everybody because I watch a lot of Drag Race and I just call everyone girl and I don't care. But it takes some time. The good thing is if you just put in a little effort, it will get better. It gets easier.
I want to demonstrate something that happened to in rugby that demonstrates that we have an inclusive organization within the Hunter household. So my daughter Ariel comes in and we coached Cheyenne last year. Cheyenne is going to the same high school as Ariel, and now Cheyenne is Alex. And Alex being more of a gender neutral name, the first thing that she said to me, she says, yeah, Dad, Cheyenne is now Alex, but she's still a she. She's not a they. And it was just like off
casual
her lips.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. And she did it in a way that she knew that she was helping me, her old man, because she knew that the next question was going to be, hey, hold on a second. Am I living the same thing as I did last year? Like how much intention, how much effort do I need to put in this? And so she caught it super smart. She's like, no, she's still a she. She just changed her name. She doesn't like her name. I was like, damn, thank you.
And good for Ariel for being like, okay, I know what the next question is, so I'm just going to answer it. And you for being totally receptive to that, as opposed to like, oh God, we don't have another training on our hands or something like that. Like she knows that you're going to be receptive. So that's laudable.
And that's, I want to bring that back to what your organization should be. Either, a household. Notice that it didn't say my family, my household. Yeah. I'm working on it.
You're doing good.
I'm working on it. My household said that. And so if you use your organization as your household, it should be no different. If somebody shows in, one day Cheyenne and the next day Alex, and the supervisor goes to you and said, yeah, Cheyenne is now Alex. She's still a she. And you as a CEO go, okay, great. Thanks. Yeah. Make sure the HR knows and we're changing all the documentation accordingly. Right.
Yep. People change their names all the time, particularly women who get married. It's not that big a deal. But
it's so true. Well, I change people's names all the time. Hey, asshole.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't know anybody's name. I just call everybody honey. It's, we have no problem changing a person's name when they get married.
For marriage.
Or when they get divorced. But when someone wants to change their name because they're transitioning genders, it's like, what?
It's a big deal.
And it really should be, okay, great. You tell me your name is Martin. I call you Martin. You tell me tomorrow that your name is Martina. I'm going to call you Martina, whatever. I don't, it's really not a big deal. Where it becomes a big deal is people who are transphobic, homophobic, biphobic, and they start to insert their fear and ignorance into the situation.
So let's unpack that for a second.
Sure.
What are people afraid of? I mean, you've got a lot more experience than I do on this. So I'm going to be full out, Martin. This is Martin,
awesome.
Rugby player coach. What the fuck are they afraid of? Like, seriously.
So I'm laughing because Morgan Freeman once said, homophobic people aren't afraid. They're just assholes. And it, in only the way Morgan Freeman can say it. And but it's actually true. It's not necessarily a fear, like a fear of spiders. I think homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, I think they come from a place of ignorance and keeping in mind that those things are learned behaviors. No child wakes up homophobic. They learn it somewhere. Oftentimes from parents, siblings, extended family, teachers. Because as a child, if mommy continually says, "Ugh, all gay people are disgusting," then that gets stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
Right? And that just starts to become my belief system. And sometimes we break our belief systems and sometimes we don't. But you grow up and you just have this ignorance in you. Sometimes you've never met an LGBTQ2 plus person or a 2SLGBTQI plus person, or at least you've never met somebody who's open about their orientation.
Oh, so true. You might have one in your mix because they're so good at hiding it.
There's good money that you do. That there's someone in your life who is LGBT or 2SLGBTQI plus, who just isn't out to you. It's really good chance. But at least you don't know. And so you don't have any exposure to it. And oftentimes what happens when we have people who are homophobic, transphobic, biphobic, they have a child come out, a sibling, a parent, a friend. And that starts to change their perspective. They start to ask questions. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes they kick their kid out of the house and they're total assholes.
I know.
Which is horrifying. I don't understand anybody who could do that.
Yeah. No.
But more often, I think, than not, people have this enlightening, this moment of, oh, okay, I love this person. I now have to relearn something. And I find it is just a lack of awareness. I'll give you an example. So over the course of the summer, there were a bunch of media stories, articles that talked about drag queen story hour at libraries. And this has been going on for years, that libraries across North America will have drag queens come in and read to kids. And they're reading books about inclusion that are aimed at children. And children are, frankly, a drag queen to a child is just a big fucking clown. Big hair, big makeup, it's a clown. So it's not sexual. There's nothing about a drag queen that is sexual. And somehow, through misinformation, there were lots of protests by groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who were saying that drag queens were grooming children and they were pedophiles in disguise. and all of these nonsense stories that came out. And that was just pure ignorance. I mean, think about it. What is sexier than some guy built like a linebacker who probably hasn't shaved his back in a couple weeks, wearing more makeup than any woman ever humanly could.
All of the Dallas Cowboys cheerleading.
I was just thinking the Dallas Cowboys.
Person.
There's just painted for the gods. And you're thinking that that's a sex moment? Ew, no. That is not, there's nothing sexy about that. Having done drag myself, it is not comfortable. It is just this misinformation, this ignorance. And frankly, I think at times that's actually willful, that they enjoy being in that ignorant place.
I agree.
And hopefully they get to that moment where someone close to them comes out and they finally have to actually sort of stare that in the face and go, okay, so I have a queer person in my life and this is their pronouns and this is how they identify and it can change their perspective, hopefully.
So from all this talk that went from the initial question of what can you do as a CEO, I think we've gone around it. But the most important thing that I think Michael and I have talked about is so who said that? Oh my goodness. I can't recall on which show. They said, okay, being diverse is being equal is having women at the party. Yeah. Being diverse is setting up the party where the Black person is speaking. Being inclusive is including everybody at the committee of making the party happen. I'm butchering this so
a little
bad.
bit.
But
I'll make it simpler.
Yeah. So Michael, yes.
Equity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Diversity is just about the identities that we all have. And it's about creating those spaces where everyone can bring those identities to the workplace, to the space. Excuse me. My earbud just fell out. I knocked my microphone.
You go ahead. You pick it up.
I'm just going to do that. It is really just about making sure that everyone feels like they belong, that they matter.
I think for me, including people in the decision making is critical. And I'll say that in a word that I understand. It's not about just addressing their needs. It's about bringing them at the table so that they participate in the decision making that includes everybody. Yep. It's not having a diversity, equality, and inclusion playbook. It's to say, how do I make sure that there's people of diversity sitting at the table, bringing that and being curious, and I think recognizing that you're going to make mistakes, being curious and creating this environment of safety. And that, if you do that with anybody, regardless of straight, gay, different, whatever, that is a good way to do business.
Absolutely.
Period. Michael, what is the book, the piece of reference that you have kept on your nightstand, that you've kept with you for long, that has been a very big influence in your life?
Oh, my goodness.
Book, movie.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you a movie that was incredibly impactful for me. It came out, I think, around 1990. It's called The Long Walk Home. It starred Whoopi Goldberg, a young Whoopi Goldberg, Sissy Spacek, and Dwight Schultz from the A-Team, if you remember him. And it was about racism in the South. And it was one of those moments where I went from being an ignorant white boy raised in Toronto, incredibly diverse city, to have an awareness about the lived experiences, in this case, of African Americans in the South in the 1950s. it was eye-opening. And I remember that movie to this day. And it just had an incredible impact on my future. I think about it now and I think it's why I am where I am today, because I recognize that people's lived experiences were different and I needed to do something about that. There's lots of books that I have had an incredible impact, but that movie in particular is really a big one.
Fabulous. Thank you so very much, Michael. Thank you for the education. I've learned so much today. You've made me a better person for that. And I truly thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
With that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About. Today, we really translated how do you make somebody feel welcome, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they do, regardless of what life choices they make. If you're a CEO, your job is duty of care. And that means everybody. Doesn't mean one person and then the other person. So please like, subscribe, click the notification button so that you can have educational sessions like me for the next episode. Thank you, Michael, again. I truly appreciate you.
Thanks, Martin. My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.